Serious, people who have happened upon dead corpses randomly. What happened? On a drive to work early one morning, I came down a hill to see a vehicle off in a field to my right. It was upside down and on fire, so I immediately stopped and called 911. As I was running up to the vehicle, I could see the driver still strapped in. He wasn't moving or screaming, so I could only assume he was already dead. I couldn't get to him because of the fire. I really struggled with that for a while. That sucks, man, but you did what you could. It would be doubly tragic if you got injured or killed for a man who was already past saving. You stopped and got help. You did your part. When I was living in San Francisco, there is a homeless person sprawled on the ground. I asked some passerby if we should call an ambulance, and the guy at the store we were near said the homeless person did this all the time to get tips. I got what I needed from down the street, and on my way back I saw him being zipped up in a body bag by some paramedics. Living in SF has made me so desensitized to these things, not without empathy, just used to encountering dead or near dead homeless in the day to day. As a teenager in 1987, I found a dead prostitute on my first day of work at a McDonald's. She had hung herself on the tall fence surrounding our dumpster compactor area. I freaked and got my manager. I also saw her hanging, so freaked up: the tree I saw the body was actually pretty short. His feet were only 6 inches off the ground, so the first thing I thought was like, oh my god, what a tall guy. Then the primal fear set in. I'll never forget that morning. Happened at my elementary school party back around 1998. We were having a party at this teacher's house with about 30 other kids and 4 other chaperones. There was a pool in the back that was about 8 feet deep. We were all jumping in and out of the pool and it was dark out. Eventually the teachers told us all to come inside because it was almost time to go home. As we're all getting out of the pool, there was still someone at the bottom and wasn't moving. One of the chaperones jumped in and grabbed him. He was already dead. The whole school had a memorial for him and it was all honestly just a horrible time. In a retirement home, I walked into a room to an old man lying on the couch. I thought the old man was sleeping, so I shut the door. 2 hours later we saw paramedics walk into his room. That really sucks, man, but don't beat yourself up about it. There was no way you could have known that he was dead, and all of us would do the same thing. A guy at my university was walking to class with his earbuds in and his hood over his head. He walked right across train tracks, lost in thought, while other people were screaming at him that the train was coming. I was about 2 minutes behind and saw the immediate results of this guy not paying attention. It's a weird feeling. The matter-of-fact nature of seeing a dead person. It's not like anything else changes. The train stopped. The people who saw it were horrified, and the police came. But before the end of the week, no one at the school was even talking about it. This happened to someone I went to high school with almost word for word. Incredibly sad. In my second year at university, my good friend at the time went missing for 2 days, and after getting the warden to come with me and check his room, we found him dead. He had committed suicide in the 2 days I hadn't seen him. What still haunts me is that my last message to him was, "Hey man, you still alive?" in a joking way. Safe to say I've never sent anyone a message like that again. Oh god, I can't imagine. I send jokey messages like that all the time. I really hope you don't hold that against yourself. I used to work in hospice and I was always the lucky employee to find patients dead. We know it's going to happen, but nobody wants to be the one to find a corpse. This one bothers me the most. We had a patient who regularly worked the night shift for 40+ years and would go absolutely nuts at night due to dementia and sundowning. I checked the patient at 7 AM and he was sleeping, so I'll let him be. The night shift reported me that he had been sleeping for 3 hours. Turns out he was not sleeping. At 7:30 I came back with a breakfast tray and it dawned on me that he had been dead the entire time. I found another patient face down on the floor with no pants right at 7 AM. It was assumed that the patient stood up and had a heart attack, fell on their face and didn't get enough oxygen. It's safe to say that the night shift didn't do their job. They would sit at the nurse's station on their phones all night. Another patient passed away while looking at me and I saw his life force fade from the body as his eyes rolled back and respiration stopped. I actually had to go home after that one because I passed out after realizing what happened right before my eyes. I no longer work in hospice as it was depressing and burning me out. My last hospice experience was taking care of my grandmother and I wouldn't change it for the world. Working in hospice was one of the most humbling experiences. We always talk to the patient even when they are clearly in the hour of their death. They can hear you. Ensuring death with dignity is one of the most important life lessons that I learned. Now I work in a rehab and it's good to see people get better and go home. As a teenager I went on a walk through the green belt behind my house. The woods had a peculiar smell but I was used to stumbling across dead animals on rare occasions so I didn't think anything of it. Clambered over a log and looked down to find I'd stepped in her hair. She'd been left on the hidden side of the log wrapped in a tarp and was well into the process of decomposition. No lips, eyes, etc. Went home and called my mom in a fog of shock and she called the police. They didn't really believe me and were super casual while they walked me out to the spot so I could show them where she was. Their demeanors changed the instant they saw her and from there it was all a whirlwind. She was my age, murdered and dumped after being fricked by one of my high school teachers. I testified as a witness to finding her. Never really understood why they needed that. He went to prison but I think he might be out by now. I feel terrible for her family. It didn't traumatize me but it gave me a lot to think about in regards to the value and shortness of life. I started saying I love you to my family members a lot more afterward. Not so fun fact. The prosecution didn't need you to do that but if the jury heard what it was like for an innocent civilian to find a body they're more likely to vote guilty. It shows that their actions have an impact on more than just the dead person. It was the summer in between ending high school and starting college. Went to a local beach with a few friends and their girlfriends. It was overcast that day, so there really wasn't anyone else there. The water was pretty rough, and we were body surfing for most of the day. As we're surfing the waves, we see Coast Guard officers roaming around by the edge of the water. Soon enough, Coast Guard vehicles start driving on the beach near the water. We knew something was up. They told us we need to leave this stretch of beach immediately and don't be within a 3-4 mile radius of the area. Still a very odd request to me. Sure enough, as we begin walking back to the parking lot we see something floating in the water. I thought it was an animal until one of my friends turned white at the sight of a water-bloated man lying face down. Found out a few days later it was someone who drowned while parasailing. Absolutely tragic. In my junior year of high school my best friend and I were skipping school and walking around the woods by Murphy Park in Park Forest, Chicago Heights. There was an older man sitting on a bench on the trail, briefcase, suit, etc. He reached into the briefcase when he saw us, pulled out a revolver, shoved it in his mouth, and ended himself. My friend and I sat there and freaked before we ran to his house over on Dogwood and called the cops. I don't know the story. All I know is I have never forgotten that smell since then. Also, we didn't end up getting in trouble for skipping, so we had that going for us, which was nice. Probably thought seeing a guy kill himself was plenty of punishment. Back in 2010 I was on the train coming home from classes. When approaching the station there was a loud bang and people started flooding off the train screaming and crying. I knew something bad had happened, but I didn't know what. The platform was sheer chaos and I cautiously walked up the platform to figure out what to do. That's when I saw him. A 6-7-year-old boy had been running with his grandfather to catch his train and let go of his grandfather's hand. He tripped and went between the train and platform, killing him instantly. All I could see were his legs, and his grandfather slumped over next to the body. I immediately went into shock and had to get on a bus to get back home. I remember seeing one of my classmates on the bus, and I must have been in some state as I vaguely recall the whole bus just looking at me as I told her what had happened. Really messed me up for a long time. I have been kayaking and found a man whose decomposition was at the burst stage. Another time I was part of the recovery of a scuba diver who had been lost inside San Diego for about a month at approx 120 FSW. His mask came off and eyeballs fell out as he was pushed through to knee. Lost inside San Diego for about a month at approx 120 FSW. Can you explain what this means? I've come across multiple corpses, mainly living in Seattle. Most of the time, they were overdoses. The usual giveaway that they were dead, especially in the winter, would be to notice missing shoes. Not making a joke, it's just other homeless people would take their shoes if they were decent. The first time it was a bit jarring to see, the second, third, 14th time etc not as much. My mom found a dead body on the hiking trail near our house in California, still being guarded by the family dog. She couldn't even get close. It happened to be a classmate's father, who had a heart attack. I also saw a guy step in front of a car on purpose one night, and held his hand as he died. By that time, I was very used to seeing dead bodies, and it didn't really faze me. You did a good thing for holding the guy's hand as he died. I'm sorry that you've seen so much death. In my mid-20s walking to work, I saw 3 homeless men sitting against a brick wall drinking by some railroad tracks behind a Target. One of the men looked a little off, but I couldn't tell why till I got a little closer. He had some blood leaking from his ears, nose, eyes, mouth, not thick blood but watery. I told the 2 men their friend looks like he needs help, and they just stared off into the distance. When I crossed the street and got to work, I told my co-workers what I saw. About 20 minutes later, a co-worker called me over to a window to point out a coroner's van loading a body across the street. After work, I walked back to where I found the 3 men earlier and counted 15 empty vanilla extract bottles. I have the impression he drank them all. I took a sip of vanilla extract once, because it smelled so nice and I was curious. It burned worse than anything I've ever tasted. I cannot imagine actually swallowing that. One morning last November, I woke up and walked into my great-grandmother's room to tell her good morning like I had always done many times before. She didn't respond, which was normal since dementia had kicked in and we had been having hospice over. It wasn't till a few minutes later that my grandma told me that she had died sometime in the middle of the night. I didn't even realize she was gone, so yay. My class was making teepees in grade 5 and me and a friend found a guy hanging from a tree. We told our teacher and didn't hear anything after that. September 2017, I found the dead body of my best friend after she had committed suicide. We knew she had issues with depression, and she was being treated for it. However, shortly after she was starting her treatment, she started having headaches and was sent in for a brain scan. Her doctor found an inoperable brain tumor, and the chances of chemo and radiation working were little to none. Basically, she was given a life sentence of only a year. They never figured out how the tumor got so big without them noticing, but it was saddening. She ended up deciding one day to commit suicide so her family wouldn't have to suffer long or see her deteriorate any more than she already had. She cut open her neck, bled out. I had gone over to see her to check in on her, found her unconscious, and called 911. But by the time they arrived, she was already dead. I also found her suicide note. It listed everything that went on in her head before she did it, and it told her family what to do with her. I miss her every day, and it's the hardest thing on earth coping with the sight I saw. That was the first body I'd ever discover. The second I found was a worker at the nuclear power plant my boyfriend is a supervisor at. This happened in May 2019. I was visiting the worker's family farm, there to help his wife and daughters out with some of their livestock while the dad and my boyfriend worked on some things in the barn. I was walking to the barn at 7 AM. My boyfriend was meeting up with the others at the house, so I had went ahead to the barn to start to get the animals. When I walked in, I saw the worker, we'll call him Jim, on the floor. Jim was decapitated and blood was still coming from the neck profusely. There was a chainsaw on the table where he had been working. Apparently he was cutting roofing tiles with an electric saw and the saw jammed, so he switched to using a chainsaw with one hand and holding the roofing tile with the other. When he was cutting a thicker tile, the tip of the chainsaw hit the wooden post of the barn. It kicked back and sliced his head off. Jim's wife heard me scream, saw what had happened, and ended up leaving the city with her kids while my boyfriend and I stayed and helped clean up. Jim's funeral was a few weeks later, after the police made sure there was no foul play. I can't get either of those sights out of my head, and people wonder why I've got issues with them joking about death. This is the worst one in this thread. I hope you are okay. I hope you have access to therapy if you feel you need it. What you've seen is very traumatizing. Thanksgiving when I was 11 years old, I was walking around the edge of a golf course with my father and a friend when I saw some legs sticking out from a large bush small tree. As I got closer, I could see there was a shotgun sitting between the legs, leaning up against the trunk. My father thought it was a prank. I pulled the branches back and witnessed something that I'll never forget. The sight of what was left of the face. The picture of what I presume to be his family in his lap. I wanted to simultaneously vomit, scream, and run away. I did the latter. Didn't eat for a few days. I feel your pain. Brother-in-law attempted suicide with a .308 point blank under the chin. I was in the room 5 seconds later doing first aid, but he lived. That was even more frick than if he would have passed. I was the first person to see my co-worker after he hanged himself in our weld shop by lifting his body on the overhead crane. His neck looked like it stretched a couple feet and his face was dark purple. We didn't feel too bad for him after finding out that he was about to be charged with violating his 13-year-old stepdaughter and wanted an easy way out. Drug raid happened near our house. I live in the Philippines. While biking down the road down the house, I find an arm sticking out of one of the nearby bushes. Thought it was a mannequin arm or something, since one of our neighbors is a seamstress. Right over it thinking nothing of it when all of a sudden, crunch. I found out it was one of the druggies who got away but ended up dying of blood loss from being shot. Still had a knife in his hand. Safe to say I don't go on that route when biking to my friend's house. Strange coincidence that this all culminated on Halloween 2017. A friend of mine living in East London noticed that a man from the flat overlooking her balcony was looking straight at her late at night. She brushed it off and finished her cigarette and went to bed. The next evening when she was out there again, she noticed the man still staring at her in the same spot. She told her housemates and they decided he was just some weirdo who liked looking out of his window. You get a lot of strange folk in London. On the third day the man was still there, but his color had changed and his lower jaw had dropped open. That's when they decided to call the police. The police entered the apartment block and broke into the flat. Turns out the man had rented the flat recently and had hung himself by the window by crouching with a thin rope around his neck. The police commented to them how strange it was that he didn't leave a note behind and that he had done his laundry neatly, folded it up before killing himself. When my husband was around 11, he was chilling at the beach with his friends and FL. They were all playing and had noticed a log out at sea but figured it was just that. A couple of hours go by and I guess curiosity got the better of them and they swam out to check it out. When they were about 10 feet away, past the buoy line, he said it looked abnormally smooth and shiny for a log. They approached it. There was no doubt that his was a small body, a 4-year-old child. They were in too much shock to even start screaming. My husband says everyone was eerily quiet as they start dragging him out. As they approached the shoreline, they started yelling if anyone knew CPR, and once they brought him on shore, a guy in his 30s runs out and starts performing CPR. He started doing chest compressions. The little boy's stomach started inflating too. My husband says from the pressure probably. The police were called and everything. The auntie who was supposed to be with the boy was charged with manslaughter and neglect. It traumatized my husband to such an extent that he didn't mention it for years until he met me. I was driving down a side street and approaching a stop sign. As I was slowing to a stop, I saw a car stopped at the stop sign approaching me with some kind of frantic action inside. Suddenly, a man opens the passenger door and runs towards the house on the corner. I continued across the intersection and as I passed the car, I noticed the driver seemed unconscious, so I stopped, as did many other cars. The driver was an elderly woman and apparently had a heart attack or something. She was pulled from the car and a man gave CPR as we waited for the ambulance to arrive. But it didn't matter. The lady was dead. The strange part of this is that the elderly woman was actually taking her driving test for the DMV. The man who ran from the passenger side was the DMV official who was out on the driving test with her. So this lady died while taking her driving test. The DMV official was not in good shape at the scene. I walked out a building in downtown Phoenix one day and saw a person who had just jumped fallen from the top. I assume it was the top. I didn't see it happen of a parking structure next to the Wells Fargo building. The police had just gotten there. Or was it the EMTs? This was 5-6 years ago, so it's hard to remember, but the scene was new. The poor person was definitely deceased. I didn't know what to do, so I stood there for a minute or two. It was pretty shocking. The responders blocked off the area with tape. I left. Saw the same thing in Dallas. Homeless man jumped off the top of a parking garage right next to the train station. Train didn't stop there, but I saw them unzip the body bag as we went by. He was very dead. When I was maybe 8 or 9, I went to visit my grandpa in the nursing home. I went to go get a snack from the vending machine and wandered around a little bit. I guess I got turned around and ended up walking into a random room thinking it was my grandpa's. There was a man laying in bed, eyes wide open and mouth agape. Being the weirdly cheerful kid I was, I loudly said, "Hi mister, do you know where my Bupper's, grandpa's nickname, room is?" No answer, but a nurse heard me from the hall. She recognized me from earlier and knew which room I was looking for. She apologized to the guy, but sounded worried when he did not respond. When I got back to my parents, we were getting ready to leave and we saw some people wheeling a body bag out of the same guy's room. Last Friday I was on the train in the morning and noticed a homeless guy wrapped up in a sleeping bag laying under one of the benches at one of the stations. Going home, went through the same station and noticed the guy was wrapped up in the same exact place and hadn't moved. It was also in the 90s by that time in the day, so there's no way someone would be bundled up like that. I called the local PD to check as I was on the train and it's not a station I have to get out at. Pretty sure I reported a body. Me and my friends, we were like 11, were walking down a train rail and we saw someone with his head gone. We walked up to the body and saw that he must have put his neck on the trail and let the train do the work. We weren't afraid, but we were confused about where this poor man's head went. We called the police and they took the body, but to this day, I am creeped out by that sight of someone headless, just laying there. I witnessed a motorcycle crash. 2 dead. 1, nothing really physical. Another was completely ripped in two. The top part of him was caught in the railing of a tunnel all mangled. The other part of him was maybe 10-15 yards away from him. I could see his intestines and his legs twitching. When I was younger, my mom told me we were going to see my grandma for the last time. I didn't understand that meant we were going to a funeral. IDK if this counts, but I was not expecting to see her dead. I know parents like to shield their kids from death, probably for longer than they should. But if you knew she was dead before you got there and realized it was a funeral, it would have been less scarring. Short version. Some buddies and I went to a park and decided to climb down the bluffs to the beach. Found a dead dude on the beach. So bloated. Really gross. Turned out he had been missing for days after jumping into Lake Michigan to go after his freaking hat that blew off. Started college 2 days later. That was a heck of a week. One of my cousins had a boyfriend who got hit by a truck on the highway because he'd run out to grab a friend's license plate that had fallen off his motorcycle. Dude somehow survived, but it still baffles me. Hats and license plates aren't freaking worth dying over. The only one I've seen was a guy who had presumably been ejected from his vehicle in a crash. It wasn't gruesome, but I remember being disturbed by the way his limbs were folded haphazardly and awkwardly about. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.